My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my life I wore a uniform. 28 years in the U.S. Army, most of them as an operations commander in forward bases, running logistics in places where heat-warped metal and silence meant trouble. After retirement, I didn't chase golf or lake houses. I signed on with the National Emergency Response Coordination Office, a civilian agency tasked with handling disasters, fires, floods, grid failures. I thought I was done fighting wars. I was wrong. The agency felt like familiar ground. It had structure, chain of command, purpose. I didn't need fanfare. I just wanted to serve, to feel useful in a world that didn't salute anymore. They put me in charge of regional logistics out of Denver. I rebuilt the state warehouse system in 8 months, streamlined vendor pipelines, cut supply delays during winter storms by 43%. I kept my head down. I let the younger ones have the headlines. I didn't miss the action. What I missed was clarity. In the Army, you knew the mission. You knew the cost. In the agency, politics filled the gaps. Meetings dragged, titles grew longer, and people learned to say a lot without meaning much. Still, I thought I was making a difference. Until the day they told me I wasn't needed anymore. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of morning where the snow hadn't melted off the windshield yet and the coffee tasted burned but warm. I was reviewing an after-action report from the Montana wildfire response when Brianna from HR knocked once and entered without waiting. She was young, polite, always looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She asked if I had a moment. I said sure, without looking up. She laid the envelope on my desk like it was something fragile. I noticed the agency seal, the red tab. I opened it slowly. The letter inside was short. 2 paragraphs, 1 signature. My position had been dissolved. Effective immediately. No prior notice, no conversation, no handshake. I remember reading it twice. Not because I didn't understand. I just needed to make sure I hadn't missed some line that made it all make sense. But there was nothing else. No thank you for your service. No offer of reassignment. Just a final paycheck and instructions on returning my badge. I asked if this came from Director Holmes. She hesitated, said it was reviewed by legal and routed through the deputy administrator. Said they appreciated my contributions. That was the phrase she used. Contributions. Like I'd donated blood, not decades. I nodded. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't slam the desk. I stood, gathered my notes from the table, and placed them in my leather folder like I would any day. She stood there, still talking, probably reading from a script she'd rehearsed. I didn't hear most of it. On the way out, I passed the wall of commendations I'd installed 3 years ago. Disasters averted. Lives saved. I saw my name in the corner of one plaque. I paused. Not out of pride, just to remember. Then I kept walking. I exited through the west doors, the ones near the loading dock where volunteers gathered supplies. No one looked up. I stepped into the cold and let the wind hit me full in the face. It felt clean, honest, at least more honest than the letter in my hand. I didn't cry. I've seen too much for that. But I felt something shift in my chest, a quiet cracking sound you don't notice until much later. They called me a relic once. During a meeting I wasn't supposed to overhear. Said I was holding up progress. Maybe they were right. Or maybe they forgot who built the road they're driving on. Either way, that was the day they tried to erase me. And that's where the story begins. The knock was soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. I glanced up from the supply chain dashboard just as the door creaked open and a young man in an agency polo stepped inside. He looked barely old enough to shave. His name tag said Daniel. His shoes were still wet from the snow outside. He clutched a tablet in both hands like it might explode. He asked if I had a second. I said I did. He stepped closer and held out the screen, his fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. I looked down. It was a termination agreement, digital, already signed. My name, my ID, the timestamp. It read like a clean cut, voluntary resignation, signed by me at 7:13 that morning. I was still pouring coffee at 7:13. I raised my eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. He avoided my stare and mumbled something about protocols, how everything had been processed already. I took the tablet gently, turned it toward me, and stared at the signature. My name was there. It wasn't mine. It was close. Too close. But I knew my own hand. I asked if Director Holmes had reviewed this. He said it came from above, routed through legal, standard procedures. I asked again. His eyes darted. He didn't answer. I could hear the HVAC humming. I could hear my own breath. I stood slowly. The office felt smaller. I told him I wasn't going anywhere without answers. He tried to step back. I told him to bring the tablet and follow me. We walked past the war room, past the maps I'd hung myself, past people who suddenly wouldn't meet my eye. Something was off. Something deeper than just bureaucracy. I'd seen it before. Not in offices, but in tents under foreign skies. When someone got cut loose without warning, it meant someone else had already decided their fate. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. I could feel Daniel's nervous energy bouncing off the walls. I asked him why the system thought I signed it. He stammered, said it looked like my signature. That was all he knew. I told him to prepare himself. This would be his first lesson in how the real game is played. The moment I saw that forged signature, something in me clicked back into place. Not the soldier part, the strategist. The man who once ran missions with no margin for error. They tried to erase me, but they forgot one thing. I never left my flank exposed. The sixth-floor boardroom had always reminded me of a command center. Frosted glass, a long table that could seat 12, screens along the wall. I'd overseen the redesign myself 2 years ago, after the hurricane response audit exposed major flaws in our crisis workflow. Now I was walking back in, not as a senior advisor, but as something more unpredictable. Daniel followed 2 steps behind me, still gripping the tablet like it might save him. The moment we entered, heads turned. A few people froze. Mid-conversation, others just went quiet. I caught the flicker of discomfort in their eyes. Some glanced down at their laptops. Others just stared like I was a ghost. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence work. Authority isn't always volume. Sometimes it's just the way you stand in a room and make people remember who built the floor beneath them. At the end of the table, Deputy Director Monroe stiffened. His hand hovered above the keyboard like he wasn't sure whether to keep typing. I walked to the far side of the table and pulled out a chair, not to sit, just to lean on it. I asked him one question: who approved my resignation? His lips parted, but nothing came out. I raised the tablet so everyone could see the glowing blue screen, my signature, the timestamp. I let the image hang in the air like smoke. Then I asked the next question: who forged it? That got a reaction. People shifted in their seats. Rena, from compliance, glanced down, her phone suddenly very interesting. Director Holmes wasn't there. Neither was Trent Bishop, our chief operations officer. I wasn't surprised. I had a hunch they'd want distance if this thing unraveled. Daniel stayed by the door, silent and stiff. I didn't blame him. He was a pawn in someone else's play, but I'd seen enough battles to know that pawns sometimes deliver checkmate. I turned back to the room and said the words carefully. I didn't authorize anything. I didn't resign. And unless someone here can explain how a digital system signed my name while I was stuck in traffic, this conversation isn't over. No one moved. I looked at the clock. The board meeting was scheduled to start in 7 minutes. I didn't plan to leave. Not yet. Not until they realized that the man they tried to cut out was the one who still held the blueprint. The one who never stopped watching. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the snow had started to melt. The sun was low but sharp, the kind that made you squint even through the windshield. I sat there for a minute, hands still on the wheel, watching the steam rise off the hood like the last breath of something that had just died. Then I got out, walked into the house, and went straight to the garage. There was a rusted metal storage box on the top shelf, behind an old propane grill and a busted snowblower I never got around to fixing. I had to stand on a step stool to reach it. When I pulled it down, the dust came with it, thick and dry. I popped the latch. Inside were folders, receipts, stamped envelopes from over a decade ago. Everything was labeled under Redstone Logistics, LLC, a shell company I'd built 15 years ago when I thought I might start a private ops consulting business. I never did, but I never shut it down either. That afternoon, I called Jensen. We'd served together in Kuwait. He was my logistics second. Now he ran his own law firm in Austin, specializing in contract disputes and corporate structuring. He answered on the second ring. I didn't waste time. Told him what had happened. Told him I needed Redstone reactivated under full compliance but off-grid. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Give me 72 hours. I knew it would take him 48. While he handled the filings, I started digging through my home files. I still had old procurement blueprints from my early years with the agency, vendor relationships, budget structures, chain of command schematics. I wasn't looking to burn anything down. I just needed to find the seams in the armor. Every institution has them. Gaps they patch over with good intentions and forgotten passwords. That night, I cleared off the dining table and laid everything out like a mission map, post-its, timelines, color-coded indicators. I worked through dinner and past midnight, not because I was angry, because I was focused. They tried to delete me with a forged signature. That was a blunt move. I didn't believe in blunt. I believed in precision. By the second day, Redstone was alive again. New registered agent, new address, no noise. Jensen routed everything through a dormant logistics license tied to rural operations. Perfect cover. No one at the agency would flag it. And even if they did, they wouldn't understand what it meant. I stared at the articles of reinstatement and felt something shift. Not vengeance, not pride, just clarity. This wasn't about getting my old job back. This was about proving they never should have tried to take it from me in the first place. I still had one weapon left, experience, and no one saw it coming. The first thing I did was find the original charter. Buried in an encrypted drive, last accessed in 2014, 72 pages of bylaws, operational clauses, and structural frameworks that most people forgot even existed, but I hadn't. I'd helped draft it back when the agency was still a patchwork of overlapping divisions. I remembered the language. I remembered the loopholes we left behind because no one thought they'd ever matter. Page 47. Clause 9b. Proxy voting rights through dormant equity shares in external holding entities. Non-voting by default, unless triggered by unsanctioned executive action. They fired me without a full board vote. That was the trigger. The clause was still active, the name next to it was mine. I drafted the reassignment paperwork using Redstone as the proxy holder. Filed it through a rural registration channel in Utah, attached to an old transportation subsidy. It didn't raise alarms because no one was looking in the right place. Then I logged into the agency's legacy backend using an old admin credential that hadn't been scrubbed since I retired. It took 3 tries to remember the access code. Once I was in, I mapped the internal asset review queue. I rerouted 2 dormant reviews and flagged them under high-sensitivity logistics. Assigned them to Trent's division with a 30-day deadline and automated triggers for noncompliance. Then I built 3 new project entries from scratch. Gave them names that sounded important. The Horizon Metrics Task Force, Omega Load Redistribution, Compliance Phase 5, all came with folders. Memos, briefings. None of it was real. But real wasn't the point. The point was distraction. Decoy operations that looked just close enough to strategic priorities to keep everyone busy while I moved underneath. I set them on auto-escalation, linked to irrelevant budget codes. By the time someone figured out the patterns didn't connect, it'd be too late. I didn't send emails, didn't talk to anyone, just moved data and watched response times. I knew how fast the agency operated. I'd written the original escalation matrix. If anyone caught on, the alerts would come through Level 2 compliance. But Level 2 was backlogged by 19 days. I checked. It felt like planning a ground op, only this time, the terrain was digital and the enemy was overconfident. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. To show them what happens when they confuse age with irrelevance. Experience doesn't scream. It waits. It watches. Then it moves so quietly, no one sees the strike until the smoke clears. By Friday, everything was set. Redstone held legal control of the voting rights. The agency's decision-makers were tangled in their own red tape, and I was exactly where they thought I wouldn't be. Not gone, not defeated, just quiet, waiting for the next move. The room fell silent when I walked in. 12 people seated around a polished oak table, their expressions a mix of annoyance and curiosity. I carried a slim black case in one hand and a sealed manila envelope in the other. No one said a word. They had all seen the termination email. I was supposed to be gone. I took my old seat at the far end of the table. Then I looked at the chairman and nodded once. We'll start here. I opened the envelope and slid out a notarized set of filings. State certified, stamped, time-logged, Section 9B from the original organizational charter. Proxy reversion clause. Effective immediately, Redstone Logistics holds strategic voting rights previously assigned to me. I paused, letting that settle. One board member blinked hard. Another adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. The CEO, Trent, scoffed, said it was a bluff, that the clause was a relic. I smiled. That's the thing about relics. They last longer than people expect. I laid out the rest of the documents, proxy reassignments, filing certificates, evidence of digital forgery on my termination documents, time-stamped login histories. The signature they claimed was mine had been executed from an IP address in the executive suite. While I was driving across town in rush hour, I had traffic cam footage, toll records, GPS logs. All of it lined up. The room shifted, postures straightened, silence thickened. I pulled out a second folder, opened it slowly. Transaction trails from the last fiscal year, 3 unapproved transfers, 2 to shell consulting firms that shared an address with a condo owned by Trent's cousin, 1 to a marketing agency that didn't exist. I traced the registrations, found matching tax ID anomalies, fake vendor names. The signatures authorizing the payments matched Riley's handwriting. Same pen, same ink, same pressure points. Trent leaned forward, his voice rising. He claimed the charges were part of a fast-track growth plan, that they had been vetted. I pulled up an email thread from Jenna, the junior finance analyst on the 4th floor. She'd flagged those exact transactions 3 months ago. Every one of her reports had been rerouted away from compliance. Buried. I projected her memo onto the big screen. Clear, meticulous, dates, amounts, vendor IDs. She had done everything right. They ignored her. One board member looked physically ill. Another whispered something to legal. Ellen, the board chair, picked up one of the documents and read it silently. Her lips pressed tight. Trent stood again, said this was a setup, that I had broken into internal systems. I stayed seated, calm. I accessed legacy systems using my own credentials, still valid as of this morning. All timestamps are certified. No breach, just truth. I pulled out a small red flash drive and placed it on the table. This, I said, is your internal audit. You didn't ask for it, but I conducted it anyway. I opened the drive and projected the files. Budget inconsistencies. Departmental memos drafted by someone who wasn't even in the country at the time of signing. Reports backdated and linked to non-existent projects. Every single trail led back to Trent or Riley. No one argued now. Even Trent sat down slowly, pale. His hands trembled near his nameplate. Riley didn't speak at all, just stared at the floor like it might open up and save him. I leaned forward, looked each of them in the eye. You tried to erase me, but the systems you built were based on a blueprint I wrote, and I never gave you permission to change it. Warren, the senior board advisor, cleared his throat, said he would move to suspend Trent pending a full investigation. Hands went up one by one, unanimous. No hesitation. Not a sound. Just resolution. I placed the last document in front of Ellen. A sealed recommendation letter for interim CEO. Not me, Jenna. The one person who had the guts to speak when it mattered. I stood, picked up my case. Nobody clapped. Nobody objected. They were too busy trying to figure out when exactly the floor beneath them had started to crack. I didn't need to say another word. I had done what I came to do. Then I walked out and let the silence finish the job. The room was still heavy when I cleared my throat and spoke again. I won't be taking the CEO position. That made a few heads snap up, some in confusion, others in disbelief. I reached into my jacket and placed a folded letter on the table. Her name is Jenna Moore, finance analyst, 4th floor. She saw the rot when no one else dared to look, and she did something about it. I trust her judgment more than anyone else in this building. One board member muttered that she was too young. I cut him off gently. Leadership isn't about age. It's about trust. About doing the right thing when no one's watching. Jenna did that. No one had to ask her. She just did her job. And she got buried for it. I looked around the room, at the same faces that once thought I was past my time. I never needed the title. I just needed them to remember how this place was built, and who kept it standing when everything else was crumbling. Then I stood, nodded once, and left the letter on the table. Letting go of the power felt easier than holding on to it, because some legacies aren't carried in names, they're carried in choices. The building behind me hummed like it always had, a steady, low noise that never really left you. The glass doors closed with a soft whisper, sealing off the chaos I'd left behind. Outside, the light had shifted. Autumn's sun, cool and clean, laid itself across the pavement like a quiet goodbye. Lou, the lobby guard, looked up as I passed. He didn't speak, just gave me a nod. Not the kind you give a boss. Not even the kind for a soldier. It was the kind you give a man who did what needed to be done. The lot was mostly empty. My truck waited in its usual spot, 5th from the east stairwell. I walked slower than I needed to, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel it all one last time. When I reached the door, I paused, looked back once. Not for the building, but for the years. The duty, the battles no one saw. Then I got in, turned the key and drove. No fanfare, no applause, just peace. The kind that only comes when you've done what was right and left the rest behind.